So thank you all on behalf of Impact Capital Forum for joining us today. We're so excited to have this conversation with Dr. Dawn. It is a bit of a unique shift from our typical programming, but since Dr. Dawn is so specialized in switching careers, and sustainable investing requires very unique sort of career navigation and to find the job that we're all looking for, I thought it would be a great conversation, and especially during these COVID and post-COVID times, just the kind of conversations that we should be having and the skills that we should be thinking about. So Dawn, we're so excited to have you with us today. Just on behalf of Impact Capital Forum, quickly, I'm Carolyn Alwyn. I'm chair of the board. We host events focused on social enterprise, impact investing, sustainable investing, and historically microfinance. So we have a diversity of events. Our goal with these events is to educate all those around you so that we can help aggregate more capital towards impact. We have upcoming just a quick overview of the events that we have coming up. We have our Opportunity Zone working group coming up where we'll have Blueprint Local, Ross Baird's Blueprint Local and Opportunity Alabama talking about their great work in implementing Opportunity Zone capital. Then we have a fireside chat with Karen Sherman, who is an expert in all things Rwanda and has built a phenomenal vocational and postgraduate education opportunity for women in Rwanda post-genocide. So she's written a phenomenal book about her experiences and about supporting these women in Rwanda and beyond. In January, we also have a great opportunity to interview and meet with Jeff Cohen at SASB, who's written a paper recently on implementing SASB into the private market context. We know that typically SASB is applied in the public market context, but this is a great opportunity to learn how we can apply a SASB into the private market context. We also have an event that will be posted later today, a great opportunity within our social entrepreneurship showcase to visit Coral Vita, which is a coral reef revitalization farm out in Grand Bahama Island. So we will have an opportunity to meet with a co-founder, but we will also have an opportunity to take a virtual tour, which is great for those of us who are craving sort of traveling and perhaps just turquoise waters. So that being said, thank you all for joining us. So I think we've got a great crowd today. So I'm just going to introduce Tammy. Tammy is one of our superstar members at Impact Capital Forum, who was kind enough to host this event. So we're excited to have Tammy host. And Dr. Dawn, I had the privilege of working with at Wharton, and I learned so much from her. So I was excited to help showcase her and all that the wisdom she had to share in her latest book, Switchers, to help all of us learn more about how we can acquire the skills we need to navigate this landscape. So Tammy Lynn is our moderator. Tammy has worked in 5 different industries ranging from education, retail to professional services and the United Nations. As a fellow ICF member with a passion for sustainable impact through the financial world, Tammy constantly looks forward to personal and professional development opportunities. She's excited in this conversation to incite an engaging conversation with Dr. Graham to enlighten all of us on how we can empower ourselves in our own reinvention. Thank you so much. I turn it over to Tammy.
All right. Thank you, Carolyn, for that kind introduction. Hi, everyone. As Carolyn mentioned, today we have the pleasure of picking the lovely brain of Dr. Dawn Graham. When this current global pandemic epitomizes how the one constant thing is change, there's no better person to learn from than Dr. Graham on the strategies to remain marketable in this ever-advancing, changing economy. Dawn not only was a former corporate recruiter and now the current executive career director at the Wharton School for the past 6 years, she's also a licensed psychologist, both in the book that you see featured behind her, Switchers, How Smart Professionals Change Careers and See Success, and in her SiriusXM radio show, Dr. Dawn on Careers. She shares with us guided action steps on how to overcome the psychological challenges that contribute to what makes the job search ever so often very daunting. When you take a look at her LinkedIn, you'll see she has over 20 recommendations raving how Dr. Dawn has positively changed the lives of so many, guiding people in their career switches and securing opportunities that align with their values. Well, all the while making people feel at ease, which is something we all definitely need, especially in this past 9+ months. So we have a lot to learn today, and as we dedicate this time to invest in ourselves. So thank you all for being present, and thank you, Dawn, for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for that incredibly generous introduction, Tammy. And of course, Carolyn and everyone at Impact Capital Forum. You guys have an amazing lineup. So I'm honored to be a part of this today.
Yeah, so I mean, I think with all the time that we're sharing together here, let's start right off the bat with understanding a bit more about the job market and what we're dealing with. You come with such a breadth of expertise. Think it'd be helpful for us to know what trends you're seeing today. Um,
So I have to say, I love the juxtaposition of the fireplace with a nice glass of wine in the background behind you, because it's such a calming effect compared to what we've experienced this year. And, I think this isn't going to be news to anybody on the session that obviously 2020 has really accelerated the pace of what was happening in the market before. So alternative work schedules, hybrid roles, we're seeing obviously a lot more positions go remote. Any role you look at online will have some component of technology and analytics. We know that people are working longer. I mean, they're retiring later. We know that tech is taking over a lot of positions and new industries are emerging and old ones are fading away. So all of this has really been accelerated in 2020, which I think has opened a lot of people's eyes to facts that have always been the case, but maybe were easier to ignore prior to this year, which are, that job security is a myth. We've always I think believed that if we get in with a good company and we have a good 4-year education, that's going to sustain us throughout our career. And we know now that, if you didn't believe it before, you believe now that certainly is a myth. And in 2020, we've seen even stellar performers get laid off or furloughed. So the other idea that if you just do a great job and you are a stellar performer, that's going to be enough has really been shattered. And that's scary for people because, we believed in these things and now we're seeing that these are no longer true. Now, the positive side of this is that we all get to reinvent ourselves and our careers and maybe pursue things that we have a deep interest in. And we're going to see that switchers are going to become the new normal. We're going to see that education isn't a one-time deal early in our professional lives, but something that we engage in over and over. And, we have a career, we might take a either time off to get re-educated, or maybe our company will upskill or reskill us, or we'll do maybe online courses. But this constant reinvention, this constant learning is going to be the norm going forward, which is both a little bit scary for those who are used to a traditional career, but also somewhat exciting for people who can't see themselves doing one thing forever.
yeah, I mean, I love the framing of both, right? It's this acknowledgement of the fear that comes with it, but also the opportunity that it allows us to embrace and take on. And with that, you mentioned reinvention. So, in wanting to take proactive steps in embracing this reinvention, what areas would you say we should focus on?
So I think when people think about reinvention, Tammy, their first thought goes to skills. Should I take an online course? Should I take LinkedIn Learning? Should I do a certificate program? Should I go back to grad school? What new skills should I build? And I think that definitely is a part of it. I don't think you need to go to necessarily a formal program anymore. You don't have to take 2 years off or go, to night school for 3 years. There's a lot that you can do now with these online certificate programs. So for example, one that I was looking at is called Colaberry, and it's a 12-week course that teaches you data analytics, which seems to be part of every job description now. And you can do it flexibly at your own pace. A lot of the big companies like Amazon and Google and IBM are building these programs, not just for their internal employees, but for anyone who wants to take them and reskill. So there's a lot of new options. And I think the biggest challenge right now is that people don't know about them. And that's one of the tasks that those of us in the profession have for the upcoming years, is to make sure these programs are available, they're accessible, they're obviously priced much lower than general university degrees, and they're optimal for what we call non-traditional students, which actually make up about 70%. Non-traditional students being, older, further in their career, maybe managing families, maybe working full-time, going to school part-time. So there's a lot of these programs emerging, which is fantastic, but people need to know about them, and people need to be able to learn how to assess what's going to be marketable, not just what is going to be interesting. So the skills part is real. And I think you can also get this inside your company as well. You might ask to work on a special project or work with a different client, or, add something to your job that is different and new that will teach you a new skill set. So you don't necessarily have to go out and join a program, so to say, but that's just one part of it, Tammy. So skills are important. You need this continuous learning, but there's two other pieces that people sometimes overlooked, and that's brand. So once you gain these skills, you have to rebrand yourself. You have to be visible that these are part of the package you bring to the marketplace. So, that might be through your LinkedIn, that might be through how you communicate to others, but visibility is very important. So it's not enough to just get these skills. You need to make sure that they're visible and you're presenting them to the world. And then the third piece is your network. Your network has to be ever evolving. And a lot of people hear that word network and they think, oh, I'm so tired of being told to network. But honestly, I hope people rethink what they categorize as networking, because honestly, it's just in a very basic sense, as it relates to reinvention, just telling the people in your life, whether it's your colleagues or your family or your neighbors or the people who already have relationships with you, that you're reinventing, you're looking to do something new in 2021, and letting people know about that. Because when you're reinventing, the challenge is the people who know you best, who want to see you succeed and are in your inner circle, tend not to realize that you've reinvented unless you're very explicit about it. So I think that's a really easy way to make sure that you're building a network that aligns with that reinvention. So those three things, your skills, your brand visibility, and your network, are the three aspects I think we all need to be thinking about as we contemplate career reinvention.
I mean, I think those points hit such solid marks in regards to really positioning yourself well for this changing market, right? In regards to more specifically, this more sustainable investing area where Carolyn mentioned, it's ever evolving as well. It's dynamic. Even the organization itself rebranded from microfinance to the Impact Capital Forum. Mm-hmm. So when you are in this context where the industry itself is trying to rebrand and reinvent itself, how best should one go about assessing what skills that they need, in how they should brand themselves, in what connections they should really foster and prioritize?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, Tammy, because it's not just enough to say, oh, I'm really interested in this, I'm gonna learn a new skill. I mean, that's great too, but I think anything that really stretches your mind and creates opportunities to think differently can be helpful, but it's really assessing the market. And I think that's something that we tend not to do regularly, maybe not until we're in a job search. And then we realize, wow, they're asking for skills that I've not heard of, or programs that I've not worked on, because I've been in a company for the last 10 years and we don't use those. So I think we all need to do a better job knowing now how quickly things are shifting, of staying in touch with what's going on. So if it's an industry, understanding what's changing in that industry or what's influencing that. It might be new policy, it might be politics, it might be globalization, it might be technology, but there's always these external influences changing and shifting industries that if we're not paying attention to, we might be developing all of these skills that aren't going to be marketable. And so that combination of not just asking yourself, what's my superpower and how can I optimize that, but what problem do I want to solve in the current market? And that's a question I ask myself often. What problem do I want to solve in the current market? Because that taps into my interests. It taps into maybe my expertise, and it also taps into something that's real and a challenge in the market today. So I think that's a really important question we need to ask ourselves as we're thinking about reinventing.
So when does one know when they're ready to switch or be a switcher?
Very, very good question. And I think it's different for everybody. But it's something you really need to ask yourself. I think the first indication usually is that we're feeling restless or bored in our career. We don't see really that we're learning anything new. And, unfortunately, some of us get really comfortable in this and we're like, we're okay with this and we're just going to ride this out. But I think we all need to pay attention to that, because the rest of the world is moving forward, even if we want to stay in our little comfortable pod. So I think you have to assess how much longer am I going to be working? What changes are coming to my industry? Am I learning? I think it's really important, if you do a performance review or some kind of formal feedback at your company, or even if you don't, to really assess, what have I learned this year? Who have I met this year? What have I done that is a resume builder this year and is a marketable skill? And if you find you're not really moving those blocks forward, sometimes you can get them externally, or sometimes you can have a conversation with your boss and create those opportunities internally. But if you're finding that the rest of the world's moving forward and you're not, it might be a good time to assess if this is a good time to make a move. And I think once you do that, what's most important is knowing where you're going, because no employer wants to hire somebody who's running from a situation. They want to hire somebody who's excited and running to a situation. So once you've kind of determined, all right, I'm bored, or I'm restless, or maybe I'm in a toxic culture, or maybe my job has changed so much that it just doesn't really align with what I want to do anymore, then you need to start saying, okay, what problem in the world do I want to solve? And how do my skills contribute to that? And then really, really do some self-reflection around that and get excited about that.
I mean, it reminds me of the part in your book where you talk about the intersection of identifying your interest, understanding the market, and then knowing the skills, that like the merger of the three, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's so important, because I think a lot of times we might know our interests and we sort of know our skills, but then we're not paying attention to the market. And without all three, you run the risk of having a great idea, like, wow, I really love books and I'd really like to open a bookstore. But you that may not be the most marketable idea right now.
So once you've done all that, what's the next step? Like when you have done that soul searching, you've taken all this time in pandemic to really assess and do everything, then what's next?
So once you figure out what I call in the book your plan A, I think it's important to understand your psychological hurdles that you have to overcome. Because as easy as it is to say, I'm really excited about making this career switch, there's a lot going on in our own minds, especially if we've established ourselves in an industry or in a function that merges with our identity. And believe it or not, even if you're excited to make a change, that can be really hard, because you're so used to introducing yourself by your title or your company, or really aligning with your profession. I'm a lawyer, I'm a professor, I'm a doctor, whatever those things are, that it can be a little bit frightening to kind of strip that away and become something else. So I think it's really important to understand what's going on in your mind. And if you can't kind of deal with that, what's going to happen is you're going to have a tough time rebranding, and you're going to go to market saying, well, I'm a lawyer, and that's not going to be a great strategy. You really have to put this new identity on and embrace it. So I think that's really step one. Understanding what obstacles you're going to face personally, and then accepting any sacrifices that you might need to make. So you might need to be not the smartest person in the room now, or you might need to perhaps take a step back in level, or you might need to go through some training that is a little bit uncomfortable for you as somebody who's used to being the go-to person. But I think once you recognize that and come to terms with that and see yourself on the right ladder and on the other side of it, then you can kind of get back into that excitement stage and be ready to face those obstacles.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us in the job search, we face that issue of excitement, motivation, right? There's several job switch killers, as you
Mhm.
point out. Could you highlight some of them and kind of share, what things you would emphasize to overcome those?
Yeah, so one of the biggest ones is the failure to rebrand, and this goes back to really wanting to hold on to that identity. And what I talk about is when you're in a job search, the job search is about elimination, not selection, and that kind of confuses people. But the fact is, when 250 people apply to an open job, obviously they can't interview that many people. They can't hire that many people. So the first process that the hiring team goes through is one of elimination, looking for very easy ways to say you're too expensive, you don't have the right skills, you don't have the right number of years experience, you don't have the right education, whatever it is. And it's not really till the final two or three that it becomes about selection. So when you reinvent and you're looking for a new career, you have to match first, stand out second. And what I mean by that is you need to understand the problems of the hiring manager and how your strengths solve those problems, and come to the interview or create a resume that really shows that, which means, again, it might be an uncomfortable process, but you might have to take some things off your resume that you're really proud of, or you might need to rearrange things and talk about skills that are relevant to the hiring manager and the hiring team, but are maybe not as comfortable for you. So I always tell people, it's not your greatest accomplishments necessarily or your most impressive accomplishments. It's sometimes your most relevant. Now, sometimes they overlap, but sometimes they don't. And this again goes back to that psychological pull of this is uncomfortable for me. So I think that's one of the biggest job switch killers out there is not matching first and standing out second. It's again coming out the I'm a lawyer, but, and basically what I've just said is I'm not what you want, but you should listen to me anyway. And then you're kind of done. So I think that's the one I talk about the most. I think the other one that is very detrimental to a switcher is not engaging your network. And we know this is the way of the world. We know that 70% of jobs are never advertised, and that if you're going through an applicant tracking system, about 75% of resumes are weeded out for sometimes silly reasons. Sometimes the formatting, sometimes you have the wrong words in the wrong places. And so here you are thinking, hey, I'm really qualified for this, but you never get a call. As a switcher, it's a little bit harder to get through that applicant tracking system. So you definitely need to use your network to get those doors open and get in front of the decision makers.
And you pull up wonderful statistics and everything else. And it makes me remember this one very interestingly titled chapter in your book called It's Not Fair. I feel like it relates to what you've just mentioned. Could you share a little bit more about what you mean about it's not fair?
Yeah, I remember as a child, that was like my favorite phrase. And I remember my father saying to me, yeah, you're right. Life's not fair. Get used to it. But the fact is that there's a lot of obstacles, whether you're making a career switch or you're just looking for a new job, even in your same profession. The hiring process, in my opinion, has become very disrespectful is the best word that I can think of. It's, people put all of this time into applying, whether it's creating the resume or filling out these forms, or, now they have one-way video interviews where you're talking to a computer to interview, and then they never hear from a company. They never hear anything, or they go for a few interviews and they never hear anything. And so, or maybe you do hear that, hey, you don't have the right skills and we're not going to hire you. So it's this process of rejection and frustration, and you feel demoralized because we're talking about your career here. We're talking about, again, your identity, and this is big. And I think a lot of times, I know recruiters forget, like, we're putting ourselves out there, and to be ignored feels terrible. And so there's a lot of things that are unfair. It's certainly, in fact, networking in a way is not fair, because why should the CEO's nephew get the job when you're qualified for it? I mean, that's not fair, but that's something that, you know, we encourage people to turn around and use to your benefit. But this is the deal. I think people believe the hiring process is linear and unbiased and practical and logical, but it's not. It's none of those things. We have hiring managers who have never been trained to hire, which, you know, that's not their day job. So I get that they're not spending hours learning how to interview, but then you get these questions around, you know, if you were any animal, what would you be? And, you know, really, what does that have to do with data science? I don't know. But so yeah, so all of these things. And I think what that chapter is meant to do is help you understand that this is a process you're facing. And you've really got two options. You can fight the system, you can get frustrated, and you can, you know, say, I'm not playing this game. Or you can understand that this is what we're all dealing with right now and create strategies to get around that and use your energy to kind of step around those obstacles versus getting angry and frustrated about them. I also wanted people to know that if you're feeling these things, you're not alone. You are not the only one who's being ghosted. You're not the only one who is being asked silly questions. This is pretty commonplace. And I think it has to change, but you know, a lot of people blame themselves. What did I do wrong in the interview? Or what did I say? Could I have said it different? When in fact, it's just the unfair kind of crazy process. So don't get down on yourself that you could have done something differently when, you know, you didn't know the whole time they had an internal candidate ready to step into this job, but they still put you through the hoops just to interview so they could say they interviewed 3 other people, even though you never had a chance. I mean, these things happen all the time. And I don't want people to get down on themselves thinking they could have done something differently when sometimes you can, but sometimes you can't.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, especially in regards to career switching, right? I think a lot of us sometimes end up facing this imposter syndrome of sorts, right? I don't have that traditional background. So then we try to go with our network and, you know, leverage all these, the plan A, create that plan A that you mentioned. How would you say, can we kind of talk back to ourselves to not let that imposter syndrome say like, oh, I am switching careers and, you know I have to rebrand, I know I have to do these networks, but gain that confidence within ourselves so that we can push forward.
Yeah, it is tough. And I read somewhere, instead of calling it imposter syndrome, we should just, you know, call it part of our like daily lives, because every time you try and do something new, you know, you're going to feel, you know, that you're unqualified, or you're going to screw up. I mean, I think about when I first got on the Sirius XM radio, I basically was like, have I lost my mind? I've never done radio before. I don't know how to do this. And yet I'm going to try the first time in front of a national audience. And I was terrified. I mean, same with my TEDx talk. It's like I've spoken in front of groups a million times, but here I am again, terrified. So I think the good news is that when you start feeling those things, it means you're stretching out of your comfort zone and you're learning something new and you're pushing yourself to grow. So I think that's one thing that I personally do to reframe, is to say, hey, if I'm not scaring myself at least a few times a year, I'm not doing anything that is going to have a big impact on my growth. So that's something that really helps me. I think the other thing is, again, we make things up in our head. So for example, when you see a job ad and you think, should I apply? I don't have this, I don't have that, I've never done that, I've never heard of that system. The fact is, in the same way, there's not a perfect job, there's not a perfect candidate. And research will show you that most people who get hired for a job have about 60% of the qualifications. And so I think step one is realizing that, you know, that growth and convincing yourself that you're doing something good for yourself. But step two is really understanding the facts. You know, people who apply to jobs, out of every 10 jobs, maybe you'll get 2 interviews, and that's kind of the average. So if you're getting 3 interviews for every 10 jobs you apply to, you're actually doing better than the average. Of course, if you don't know that statistic, you feel bad about yourself. So I think the other part is really understanding that a lot of the competition you're putting up there is stuff you're creating in your mind. And when you look at the facts and the actual statistics, you might be doing better than you actually think you are.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is, I just love that reframe. And I think it's just very empowering, right? When, you always hear those sayings, always be uncomfortable, do something that scares you every day, but applying that and marrying that with this idea of the imposter syndrome, I think that's very useful. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
What in trying to categorize and marry things together to understand objectively what you face and the objectives and the challenges there are, in your book you talk about a double switch. Can you explain what a double switch is versus a single switch, and like how does that mean, what does that mean in regards to the obstacles we might be facing?
Yeah, sure. I think this is part of the strategy. I think you can't look at every job change as the same thing. And I think you need to build a strategy and a realistic timeline based on what type of switch you're making. So a double switch is when you change both industry and function, whereas a single switch might be changing industry independently of function, or just changing function. So there's levels of difficulty. If you're not changing either, that which is a traditional job search, or maybe moving up in your current industry and function, or you're moving to a lateral position to earn more money, then those tend to be the most straightforward. Once you make an industry switch, that's the next easiest. And then once you get into functional, which might be that I'm a recruiter, but I want to be in marketing, or I'm an engineer, but I want to work in finance, then you start getting, a little bit more difficult. And then double switch, of course, if you're looking to change both at the same time, or if you're adding maybe a cross-country move into that, now things are pretty complex, and your strategy needs to be very targeted, and you need to give yourself enough runway to make that switch. And you might have to sacrifice more to make that switch than you might if you were just making an industry switch. So you might have to take a step back. You might have to take a lower salary. You might need to relocate. You might need to do some other things to do that, which I know a lot of people think, well, traditionally, why would I take less money or take a step down? But in the new market, what we're going to see is that it's really important for you to be on the right ladder. So if you know you're not on the right ladder and you're just moving up and up and you're not happy, or it's an industry that's declining and doesn't have a long-term future, then it really does make sense for some people to take a step back to get on the right ladder and move up in that way. So there's a lot more to think about when you're doing a double switch. And one thing you can do that I recommend in my book is a stepping stone switch. So instead of doing it all in one fell swoop, I'm going to make a double switch. You maybe change functions perhaps within your company. So maybe you're recruiting and you start networking with the marketing team. And because you've proven yourself in that company, they're willing to give you a shot. And you move into marketing for a few years. And then you decide, okay, now I've been doing marketing in pharma for 2 years, but I'd really like to be doing it in tech. And then you take that marketing experience a few years later and move into tech. So that's something that may take a little longer, but probably comes with fewer sacrifices and might be easier depending on what type of switch you're ultimately looking to make.
So for understanding what one is coming up against in wanting to do their switch, is there even an average timeline in regards to how long it can take to make your switch?
So yeah, I think average timelines have been blown out of the water with 2020. It also depends on how much time you're putting into it. I think it depends on how strong your network is. So if you're completely starting from scratch and you're building up your network, it might take more time, but it's worth it because you have a strong network, you're going to have many, many more opportunities and options. It might depend on, what else you've got going on in your life. Are you, do you have a family, especially now you're trying to homeschool and you just don't have the time to dedicate. So yeah, I would love to be able to say that you'll be able to do this in 6 months or less, but there's so many factors that complicate it, which is why I think understanding your type of switch, and knowing that a double switch is certainly going to take a lot longer, most likely then an industry switch, and using that to decide what's going to make the most sense for you and your family and where you are in your life and your career is something that the book really talks about. Is consider all of these levers and how they impact you, and also give some suggestions for what you might do to overcome some of these obstacles if that's something you're facing.
Yeah, I mean, what came to mind while you were speaking of that was all of your testimonials from your recommendations that I was reading on LinkedIn. So many people, everyone, just letting you know, not trying to give Dr. Donna a shameless plug, but there actually were in her reviews of people saying they anticipated the process taking so much longer, and then it was a third of the time they anticipated. That being said, you've mentioned quite a bit about networking. We have a question that's, I'll paraphrase a little bit from Joanna in this session, where she's wondering in regards to more of the traditional aspects of finding a job. So writing that cover letter, doing the application that you're submitting through the system. Is there, as a switcher, any way to make it convincing in a cover letter, how you can position yourself from this non-traditional background? The example she's referring to is having a high earning corporate career path and then moving to nonprofit. Like, is there a way to frame yourself to be convincing in this process?
Yeah, I think this is a great use for the cover letter. I think, I'll be honest, you've probably heard those statistics that only 17% of cover letters get read. But, again, you often have to dig below those statistics, because I'm a former recruiter. And if you know that 75% of applications don't reach human eyes, and then of the 25% that do, typically as a recruiter, I would read the resume first. And if the resume caught my eye, then I would read the cover letter. So you understand where that 17% comes from. But if I read your resume and I think, wow, this person has some interesting skills, I wonder why they're looking to make this industry switch, that cover letter can do a lot to help me understand that. It also shows that you've taken the time to really think through applying to this job. And if the cover letter is tailored and demonstrates to me that you understand the problems that our company or our department is facing, and you really highlight how you can help and maybe how your unique background is going to make an impact, that probably will inspire me to have a conversation with you. And without that, I don't know, are you just papering the world with your resume and this was an interesting job for you? Or do you have a specific reason, especially when you're moving from corporate to nonprofit? I think everybody has red flags. I'm going to say that everybody has red flags in their job search. Obviously, making a switch is one of them. And there's going to be a bias no matter what that switch is. So the bias moving from corporate to nonprofit is probably something like you're used to having all these resources and money and all of this, and you probably don't know how to function when money's tight or resources are tight. Now, obviously, that's just an assumption. It is not at all necessarily true, but this is a common red flag you're going to face. So I think one thing you need to do is make sure you understand that that's going to be a very different process, and talk about that, how you've overcome challenges with very few resources, or how you've gotten things done under budget, or how you've created situations where you've reduced costs and can do things very efficiently. I think the other thing that people worry about is your salary is going to be too high. They worry about, very different from corporate, where making money is usually the goal. Nonprofits tend to be very mission driven, and they want people who really believe in the mission and have some kind of connection to the mission. So that would be something really important to put in the cover letter as well. Like, why this nonprofit? What connects you to it? So, I mean, I've seen, and again, you don't have to get incredibly personal, but sometimes it can work out. I've seen people say, I've had a family member struggling with this, which really got me interested, or, it's something that really connects you, because I think a nonprofit would really value those things. So you really have to think about what's going to be their bias and how can I address that in my application.
I love that. One thing that caught me off guard, though, was that you look at the resume first before even getting to the cover letter. So if you have a resume with all these experiences that have, you fill it up with all the transferable things that you can, how else can you make it so that then you'll want to see that cover letter?
Right. So I think this is the hard part for people is really rebranding themselves. And I'll be honest, thank you for pointing out the reviews on LinkedIn. I think one of the things that I would mention to people, if you're looking to make a switch, think about investing in a coach. There's a number of reasons, but I think this will help you get to where you want to go faster, and it will help you get around some of these demoralizing obstacles that usually people go through for months, and then they decide maybe I need a coach. Skip all of that and just get a coach who's used to this, who understands the process, because it's really hard when we look at our own resumes and we look at our titles and our departments and our acronyms and all this. It's really hard to see ourselves differently. I mean, it is, because this is our identity, and an objective party can help you see your skills as much more applicable to other areas. They can also help you to deconstruct your acronyms and your titles into things that are meaningful in other industries in a way that you may not be able to. So I think first and foremost, have somebody help you with that process, because I guarantee you're going to go, wow, I've never seen myself that way. And I never would have seen the correlations between what I've done and what this company wants. I also believe that, you might have to leave things off. So I had a client who really wanted to move from the clinical side of pharma to the business side. And she would constantly talk about, she had a PhD in chemistry, which was super impressive, but that's not what the business side wanted to hear. They didn't care. But if you go back to this match first, stand out second concept, she had business skills because she was getting her MBA. When she started putting that forth on her resume, and when she started introducing herself that way, she took her PhD off, which I know is painful for her, but she started matching first. And then of course, when she got down to the last few candidates and she was a finalist, they asked, hey, how do you stand out? And this is where she said, well, in addition to all of my business skills, I also have a PhD in chemistry and really understand the R&D process in pharma. And that just blew them away. But I think that's, again, something a coach can really help you with. That's so hard for us to do on our own, especially when we're so proud of our background and it's kind of our cloak of confidence to kind of strip that away so that we can match first can be really, really, really difficult. And of course, I couldn't end this question without saying a network contact will be incredibly helpful, because I will tell you as a recruiter, if somebody either inside the company, even if it was somebody I didn't know, sent that resume to me, or somebody outside the company who I knew sent it to me, I would always give that candidate the courtesy of a phone screen to give them that opportunity. So I think that can be very powerful. It doesn't have to be somebody who's in that department. It doesn't have to be somebody who's best friends with the hiring manager. It could just be somebody who says, hey, I've been interacting with this person on LinkedIn. I think it's worth your time to take a look, because that can really boost your resume and cover letter application getting looked at.
Yeah, that's great. I want to make sure I include, as we're getting closer to time, two more follow-up questions, basically, to the points
Okay.
that you mentioned. One was in regards to this point about coaches, and another one in regards to time management. So the first one in regards to coaches. So if you were to invest in a coach, then how do you go about looking for one? How do you source recommendations? And then especially if you're going to go from, one sector to another, like corporate to nonprofit, like we mentioned, where does one look to go? The second question I will try to squeeze in here quickly as well too is, with the status quo sometimes often saying, don't leave your job until you have a new one. But with COVID and the longer working hours many people are actually having to take on, it seems challenging to put that much time into that networking and into those applications. So is there ever a good time to leave without something? So those two.
Okay. So I'll start with the coaching. So two places I really like for finding coaches. So LinkedIn has something called ProFinder, and if you're looking at your LinkedIn panel, there's a tab called Work on the top right, and if you open that up, there's the ProFinder, and you can search for career coaches. The reason I like this is because you can put in your kind of requirements that you want. Obviously everybody has concerns about, different pay, how much is it going to cost and all of that. So that's one of my favorite places. You could see obviously their LinkedIn profiles and all that. And I would say, I wrote an article on this not too long ago for Forbes about how to select a coach, which I'm happy to send to you if you want to share it with your participants today, because I do think there's some things that are really important. This year, we've seen a lot of people put up a shingle saying I'm a career coach. And, while somebody may be very skilled at that, I just feel like you want to find somebody who has the depth of experience and somebody who they don't have to have the exact experience, but if you want to make a switch, they should have some experience working with switchers. Doesn't have to necessarily be the type of switcher that you are, but you want somebody who has that level of skills. You want somebody who there's all of these certifications now, certified resume writer and all these things. And honestly, some of those can be helpful, but I always say it's not really about the type of credentials. It's about the type of experience somebody has and how you connect with them. Most career coaches will give you a free consult, 15 or 20 minutes. If they don't, I think that's a red flag. So definitely check a few out and find somebody who really connects with you and seems to have the experience that is going to be helpful to you. And the other resource I really like it's called themuse.com. So it's the MUSE, muse.com. And they've got a coaching site. I think they actually have some specials going on for the holidays, 15% off. But again, I like this because you can kind of look at the coaches, see their ratings, see, what other people they've worked with have said about them, and really kind of gauge if this is the type of coach that is going to work for you. So those are my two favorite places for finding coaches. Of course, you can ask people, if they've worked with a coach, if they have recommendations as well. And the second question, I think, was basically, should you leave a job before you have a job? The general industry answer is no. And the reason this is the case is because, again, hard to prove, but there is something in hiring called, unemployment bias, which is, again, totally made up assumption. But the fact is, if you're not working, then there must be a red flag, or you're not as, you're not as valuable as a candidate who is working. Totally false. And I think one of the good things about 2020 is that they've done a lot of surveys with recruiters, and recruiters have basically said, hey, if you've got a gap in 2020, all is forgiven. We get it. We understand. And that's something that's relatively new. Gaps used to be a big red flag, but I think what recruiters and hiring managers are starting to realize is that life is complex. Life happens. So whether or not there's a pandemic, people have families, people have, illnesses, people have other things going on. And just because you haven't worked consistently every day of your life doesn't mean that you're not valuable. So I think this is a good realization that's coming out of 2020 that's going to help all of us who have, parts of our background where, hey, and I'll admit this, I've done this. I've taken a job, and after 2 months, I've said, holy cow, I made a mistake. I got to get out of here. And yeah, I technically have a gap on my resume, but this happens, right? All of us have experienced this. That said, if you don't have a really toxic situation that you have to get out of, or, it is definitely better if you can try and find a job before you exit your last one, just because we know that bias exists. And, passive candidates are becoming more popular. And a passive candidate is somebody who may not be looking, but, recruiters now, because they have access to LinkedIn, they can very easily go in and type what they want and find, a number of candidates and reach out to them. And so this is something else you're going to want to do, is make sure your LinkedIn is always updated. Make sure you're being active on your LinkedIn, because this will increase your coming up in the algorithms. I mean, connect with recruiters, connect with people in the companies you want to work for. These can all be really helpful things if you think you're going to be in a job search. And quite frankly, I think we're all going to be in a job search at some point in the next few years. So it's best to start now.
Thank you. I think we've learned quite a bit today with all this time, and having been able to read your book, there's several amazing other points. Creating ambassadors, just saying, is another thing I thought was great. So whether it be learning more through your book or through your articles, I think there's plenty more that we could all take from your expertise. So I believe I will pass it back to Carolyn, as we are going to be wrapping up, unless there's any other questions that the attendees may want to squeeze in right now before we do wrap up. I'll give like 30 seconds. Usually that's when it's like just awkward enough, where then capture like whatever else people have on mind. We have this renowned expert here, people. Keep them coming, the questions.
Well, yeah, and I'd love, if you're on this and we're not connected on LinkedIn, I'd love for you to reach out to me on LinkedIn. One last tip, always send a personalized message. It takes 10 seconds and will significantly increase the chances somebody will accept. But it's always nice to know, hey, I heard you on, Impact Capital Forum, and, I'd like to connect. So
I guess I'll squeeze in one question.
Okay.
In regards to the resume and, rebranding yourself, when we're talking about this dynamic industry that's trying to figure out itself out as well, when you're trying to figure out the brand that most resonates, how do you do that on your resume when you tailor it to every single job application, and then on your LinkedIn that's seen by everyone in all your contacts, where the angles might be just a bit different, that when you coming as a switch, you're really trying to tailor? How do you balance that disconnect?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because on your LinkedIn, you can certainly only have one LinkedIn profile and professional brand. So I think as you're looking at your resume and your LinkedIn, this is why the plan A is so critical. This is why it's so critical to be really targeted, because what we know is that one of the reasons people ultimately get hired is because of that motivation, that drive, that kind of energy and hunger they have for the job. And so to that extent, having skills makes a big difference, but having that really aligned brand with your resume and LinkedIn is going to be pretty important. So one of the things people always go back to is, oh, my resume and LinkedIn is really a historical account of my experience. And I think we need to shift how we looked at that, because it's not just that, it's really an account of your abilities. And when you think about it in terms of aspirations and abilities, you can start to see a through line from all of your experience in terms of how it applies to where you're going. And you really can think about your resume and LinkedIn not as a historical account, but as an aspirational account of, here's all the things I've done, here's all the things I've learned, here's all the things I've acquired, and this allows me to do this and solve your problem in this way. So I think we really need to shift how we think about these documents or these profiles and talk about them in a way of what our value brings to the table and how it solves the problems of the market versus just, job descriptions or labels.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that brings us to time. So Carolyn, do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to?
That was so great, Tammy. Thank you so much for engaging in that conversation and bringing out this great information from Dr. Don. It was particularly relevant for, I think most of us are thinking about careers in sustainable investing and impact investing. So just starting with, what the problem is that we want to solve. And I advise my students of that too. And what's your superpower? I mean, that's great. It's so inspiring. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you both, Tammy and Carolyn. I've really enjoyed being here.
Yeah, it's been fun. I wish we could actually have some of the wine that's in my background.
I know, in the fireplace. It looks very cozy.
Yes, it looks very cozy. I missed a snowstorm that's brewing over here. All right, well, we will send out Dr. Dawn's contact information and her LinkedIn if to anyone who would like it. And we thank you so much for everyone's time.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.